Bob will be hosting this next conversation where we're going to now hear from two leaders in the House of Representatives on the role of lawmakers in making nutritious food accessible to those who need it most. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Congressman Bobby Scott and Congresswoman Nanette Barragán. Congressman Scott is the ranking member of the Education and Workforce Committee, and in 2017, he received the Congressional Voice for Children Award from the National PTA. Congresswoman Barragán is a co-sponsor of the Supporting Infant Nutrition Through Improved Breastfeeding Practices bill. Bob, back over to you.
Thanks, Katie. I first want to start on a personal note. Different issues attract different lawmakers, and Congresswoman, what's your interest in this issue? I know you're the youngest of 11 children, so that must have been a tough childhood.
It was.
But why are you interested in nutrition and this issue specifically?
Well, I think for me, this is very personal. I have diabetes in my family. It goes on and on. I happen to represent the district in California that has the highest rate of diabetes. And as a child, I don't think my parents knew better. And so when I was a kid, we always had Coca-Cola in our refrigerator, and it was more accessible than, say, water. And I didn't know any better until I was older. And remember when I left my house, and when I was 17, 18, having withdrawals from not having it anymore. And so I think it's just so critically important that we start at a very early age to educate parents, and we educate kids, so that we are on the right path, so they develop properly. And in today's day and age, something as simple as breastfeeding is becoming an issue with this administration. So we should really encourage women, make sure they know the benefits. And I just think that we need voices at the forefront right now talking about these critical issues that are gonna impact the health of our families and our country, and will get us onto the right path to help bring down some of the healthcare costs. Preventive medicine is always the best, and starting at home is the way to go.
Congressman, how about you? I know you're the ranking member of the Education and Workforce Committee, but what brings you here this morning?
For your invitation, of course.
Yes, of course, of course.
No, the Education and Workforce Committee is obviously looking at education, and we found that good school nutrition improves education. We also have jurisdiction over healthcare, and long-term health implications are involved when you talk about nutrition. If you start off with good nutrition, you can eliminate a lot of problems, cardiovascular, diabetes, and others that have, because of bad nutrition, have inflicted our population. If you follow the evidence and research, you'll know what to do, and that's a challenge in Congress. We tend to follow slogans and sound bites rather than evidence and research. But if you stick to the evidence and research, we know the value of good nutrition.
Congressman, you mentioned diabetes in your district. Now, what are you seeing in your district, though, at the ground level, and seeing issues that could be solved by government?
Well, I think education is going to be key, and continuing to make sure that we're doing that in our schools, with our parents. And I think government has a role to play in that. If you take a look at things like, the back labels of food packages, sometimes we see slogans on there and we read them and we think they're nutritious, but you check out the back and you see that it's not. Well, one of the problems, for example, in communities like mine, very working class, I represent an area that's Compton, Watts, people are working 2 jobs, they're not checking the back label. And sometimes when you check the back label, you don't even understand what it means. And you don't know, for example, that if sugar is the first ingredient, that's what it has the most of. And so if we can continue to push out the message as members, everybody has a role to play. I think this is a community effort that we can continue to make sure our children are getting what they need. I also, and this is very controversial, but the access to healthy foods. In today's day and age, we have an administration that wants to go back to canned foods instead of healthy fruits and vegetables. That is something government has a role in. You're seeing it happening right now where they're trying to cut off access to healthy fruits and vegetables. And so I think continuing to not just educate people, but making that food accessible to everybody, regardless of your social economic status, regardless of where you live. And I think that's where government certainly has a role to play.
Congressman, how would you grade this administration? There have been proposed cuts to different programs. There was the controversial issue of harvest boxes that would change the food stamp program that hasn't attracted the support of Republicans yet. So I imagine you're not going to give them a high grade, but what kind of grade would you give them?
Well, the cutbacks and the harvest box, I think, was pretty much disparaged by both sides of the aisle, so I'm not sure that's going anywhere.
Right.
But the question of access and cutting back and eligibility has a number for SNAP benefits has an unintended consequence of significantly reducing access to free and reduced lunch, because the eligibility, if you have SNAP benefits, you're automatically eligible for free and reduced lunch benefits in school, and so if you cut back the eligibility here, fewer children will be getting benefits in school. The nutrition standards are being challenged. Your nutrition habits as you grow up stay with you the rest of your life. And if you're used to eating nutritious foods, that'll serve you well in the future. If you cut back on the nutrition standards, as this administration has suggested, you'll start people off on the wrong track. And so we need to make sure that we maintain the nutrition standards. 98% of the school systems are achieving the nutrition standards, so there's really no reason to cut back.
It used to be a lot more legislation was bipartisan. The Farm Bill is one of those situations where years ago it was basically a bipartisan endeavor. The House has passed a Farm Bill. The Republicans struggled at first to get the votes. But they were able to pass one, and a lot of it really focuses around SNAP and cuts to SNAP, or as Republicans have said, reforms that are long needed to SNAP. Number one, do you think that has poisoned the well of what could be a bipartisan bill? It seems like that is the one sticking point every time the Farm Bill comes up.
There's no doubt. Look, I'm a freshman member of Congress, and people tell me day in and day out, I know Bobby could probably talk more to this, is that this is not normal. This is not the way it's been. And as you mentioned, this bill in particular has been very bipartisan. But going after children and the health and their ability to have access to food is not the way to go. If you're going to implement a tax cut to the top 1%, don't then have our children pay the price by taking away their access to healthy foods, and to see that kids are going hungry. I think it's a real disservice. And at some point, I do want to also chat about what I heard you talking about earlier about this public charge rule, because I went to WIC in my district, and I heard firsthand them saying that people are afraid right now to go and get services that they're entitled to, worried that it's going to impact their application for citizenship, or whether somebody's going to come and investigate them. Now that
You've heard that from constituents?
I have heard that from the WIC administrators in my congressional district.
And for how long?
Well, they say that the climate has gotten a lot worse ever since there's been conversation. And sometimes you hear, well, the rule hasn't been proposed yet. Oh, we haven't drafted it yet. But sometimes this administration puts things out there just to scare people, to cause fear in communities. And look, my district is 70% Latino. And you talk about fear, it is happening in my district right now. And that's not the way people should be living. It impacts mental health as well. So when you talk about what's happening now, it's incredible sometimes when you see who's targeted, whether it's families, it's children, it's public health. And so I wish we had more of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle standing up to say, we're not going to put kids at the forefront. We're not going to put public health at the forefront. But it feels certainly, as a new member, and maybe Bobby could talk more about this, that it is less bipartisan on some of the issues that we should all care about. Families, children, nutrition, mental health status, which I think goes to it. So maybe Bobby has
one of the reasons it's been bipartisan is because if people can buy more food, the food producing areas make more money. And that's why Kansas and other states have always supported SNAP benefits. And so you have a bipartisan coalition and everybody works together. When you start cutting SNAP benefits, you start losing a lot of support really on both sides of the aisle because people can buy less food and the food producers will make less money. I think the public charge problem where people are scared to access WIC benefits is particularly annoying because good nutrition during pregnancy and the first year of life are so important because a substantial portion of your brain growth takes place during that period of time. And if you're malnourished during that period of time, you'll have irreversible diminution in achievement. And so we need to make sure that we have as much focus on those early years as possible.
Congressman, you could be a chairman next year. What are the policy changes on this issue that you think Democrats should pursue? You both criticized the Republican Farm Bill and what Republicans in this administration have done, but what are the ways to get the word out, educate people so people are eating better?
Well, first of all, it's a House Republican Farm Bill. Sure. I doubt that anything like that could get through the Senate. And I doubt if Republicans in the Senate would even bother to propose it. Good nutrition standards, access to early childhood and prenatal nutrition would be a focus. You have to remember how the school lunch program started. It started after World War II, after the generals complained that all of their potential recruits were coming in malnourished and unsuited for military service. And so the school lunch program was designed for a national defense purpose. And it's continued and just continued on. But I think a focus on good nutrition, good standards would be the focus.
Congresswoman, you mentioned you're a freshman president. Do you think, and Democrats are talking more of changing the rules of the House so that it would basically be run less like a dictatorship, and whether that's Democrats years ago or Republicans who set a record for closed rules in the lower chamber. Are there Republicans that you can work with that can make the House operate better? Because there are a lot of members who are very frustrated with, on both sides of the aisle, lack of amendments, input, that everything is coming out of the Speaker's office, whether that's Democrat or Republican.
Absolutely. There are certainly Republicans we can work with. And frankly, the country wants us to work together on these issues. And so my hope is when we get control back, and hopefully that will be happening in January, that we can set that tone and make sure that we are finding people who want to work on these issues. Look, I remember getting to Congress, and within the first 6 months, I was waiting to give a 1-minute floor speech and saw a Republican stand up and give a floor speech on SNAP. And then about a month later, I was back on the House floor, and I saw the same Republican giving a floor speech on SNAP. And I remember looking and saying, who is that member? Is that really a Republican talking about SNAP? And this is the unfortunate part, because sometimes we make assumptions. But when you talk to colleagues on both sides of the aisle, you know, there are some who genuinely want to work on these issues with us. And, you know, Bobby's been here much longer than I have. But I am hopeful that we can and that we must find ways to work together. And hopefully, if we're in control, we can have a different process where we are getting input from both sides. And I think that has made it more partisan now, is this feeling that we don't need Democrats. We can do this without them. I don't think that's healthy for our country. I don't think it's healthy for lawmaking. And so I have no doubt that there are avenues and there are members that we can work with on a bipartisan basis, especially on things like nutrition and children and families and making sure that they have access to healthy foods.
Congressman, your thoughts on that topic?
Well, I think a lot more is made out of the partisanship than is necessary. There's a lot going on. Just talk about the Education and Workforce Committee. Mm-hmm. We just passed a career and technical education bill that was bipartisan. We worked hard in the House to prepare that bill, and just passed the Senate, been signed by the president. We've been working on juvenile justice. We have significant broad bipartisan support for juvenile justice legislation. Criminal justice reform, trying to get away from the slogans and sound bites and into an evidence-based approach to reduce crime and save money. There's strong bipartisan support for an evidence-based approach. Unfortunately, there's also bipartisan support for the slogans and sound bites, so we haven't made the progress that we want. But there's a lot going on, but you don't hear about that because it's not as appealing to the media. But there is a lot of bipartisan work going on, and if we can continue along those lines. There's other things that I think that, unfortunately, there's not bipartisan support, healthcare being one. If you just follow the evidence, what creates more access to healthcare at the lowest cost, we know what to do and we can be bipartisan on that. Unfortunately, on healthcare, it's just that is one where there's partisan divide for no reason at all. Virginia just expanded Medicaid, and if you look at the numbers, the Commonwealth of Virginia made a profit by expanding Medicaid because it covered a lot of things with Medicaid money that were covered by state money. The match was so small that the income tax paid by the doctors and the employees in the hospitals covered the local match, so there's really no state-level excuse for not expanding, but that was partisan. So healthcare is one area that's just gone off the rails. But things like school nutrition should not be a partisan problem. I mean, we need to make sure that our children learn nutritious, good nutrition early on. Like I said, it has long-term health implications that serve us well, and national security implications.
I do want to follow up just on the, and I think it's overlooked because legislating gets a lot of the headlines, but Congressman, can you talk about the import that if you got control of the House, oversight, whether that's on Puerto Rico, on this issue, on health care, taxes, the president's tax returns, that kind of stuff. How important is that, and how aggressive do you think Democrats would be should you win the House?
Well, I think that there's value in oversight. A lot of decisions are being made, and we'd like to know what evidence there was for that particular decision. And we've been asking questions. We're having a hard time getting answers. But a lot of decisions are made without any apparent reference to evidence and research. And I think that would be helpful. Just on the zero tolerance at the border, there are a lot of questions that have not been answered. From the education and workforce perspective, children who are here are entitled to education. What's the plan? I don't know what the plan is. It's a little hard to find. What's eligibility for social services? What's the housing? What are the Homeland Security? There are a lot of different committees that have an interest in what's going on, and the answers have not been forthcoming.
And the hearings aren't happening because of who's in control. Right? And I think that's the key part here is if you have Democrats who do get the House back, it's our job to provide oversight on the executive branch and decisions that are made. And the American people want answers, and frankly, they want hearings on some of what's happening. When you think about Puerto Rico, as you just mentioned, we had one hearing in Natural Resources where I'm a member, and we talked about the death toll then, and I said, 62, that's what the number we were hearing back then. Doesn't sound right. And we saw the photos, we heard the testimonies, I was just there. And now, of course, they're saying over 3,000 people. And there's still a backup. They have a lack of pathologists, and there's still a backup. That number is going to get higher. And it's just unacceptable. And for us not to have hearings on what happened to make sure that we're prepared next time is inexcusable. And those are the types of things the American people not only deserve answers to, but Congress has, I think, a duty to hold oversight hearings on these. And I think this is the type of things where we would be doing, and I hope we will be doing, should we get the gavel back in January.
If there is divided government, Congresswoman, I mean, do you think that this president, as you mentioned, they pushed tax cuts through, like the Affordable Care Act, and no votes from the other side? Do you think this president would change his tune and work with Democrats, especially if there is aggressive oversight going on?
I think he's going to have to.
Why?
I think he will have to because he wants to get things done. He wants to be able to go and tell people he did something. Now, he does anyways, even though, you know, he basically will take credit for, you know, what happened the last 10 years prior to him arriving. He will say whatever. He won't admit a mistake. I think that we saw some of that starting to happen a year ago when he was meeting with Pelosi and Schumer.
And the Dreamers.
Yeah, I mean, you know, having him keep his word, I think, is the harder part of this. But I think that we certainly will have leverage, and you know, it's hard to say because we have a president who, frankly, is unlike anything else we've ever seen before. And but I am hopeful that if we do get control of the House back, that he will sit down with us and we will find ways. I think there will be a lot of pressure too in having him work with us.
We're going to open up for questions for the last few minutes. So if you have a question for either of our legislators, please raise your hand and we'll come around and get you. I did want to ask you one question about 2020. I was coming up with a list of candidates I think will run, and I got to 25, 26. I don't have you on your list, so if you want to make an announcement tonight. But do you think, and this is really for both of you, that it would be good, because Democrats they have the microphone. They will have the microphone in this primary process to talk, to highlight issues, and they're going to all choose what they talk about. And is this an issue that they should talk about to put more attention on it? Because more than anything I've seen, whether it's in politics or the media, it's what the primary people who are running for president and really can spotlight an issue.
Well, one of the things that I would hope would happen is we get away from the personalities and the distractions and into substance. In school nutrition, let's talk about the issue of school nutrition rather than all of the distractions. We're having trouble talking about the issues because if you look at the talk shows, it's all about the distractions. We have a higher education bill that's pending. They'll actually cut $15 billion out of student aid, make student loans harder to pay off. We haven't been able to get that message across. Every Republican on the committee voted for it. It's pending on the floor. And most people don't even know it's pending because if you look at the TV shows, they're talking about all the indictments and guilty pleas and all of the distractions. One value of split government is maybe we'll stop talking about that and start debating the issues, what makes sense. I mean, when you talk about school nutrition and the long-term benefits of it and the cost savings and long-term health care and the national security implications, I think you can make a very good case for school nutrition. If, on the other hand, all you're talking about are the distractions, who likes who and that kind of thing, you don't make any progress at all. So if we can get to the issues, I think we can make some progress. And that's what we did with career and technical education, juvenile justice, what we're trying to do in criminal justice reform, what we did with Every Student Succeeds Act, and just talk about the issue.
Congresswoman, is the media partly to blame for focusing on things that are not policy focused, that are kind of the news of the day, and of course indictments are news, but that, how do you see the media covering politics and ways that the media perhaps could do better?
Well, there's no doubt. Look, they report the news and they love ratings, and these are headlines that people tune into to see. And I think I have said it when I've been on the news, when I have been at the table. I've seen it a couple times. Like, I would like to see them cover more of what we're doing on policy, on substance. Because when I go back to my district and when I have a town hall, people ask me, what are you guys working on? What are you doing? The American people don't know. Now, what are the things that I do in my office is I try to send letters out to constituents saying, I signed on to this bill, I wrote this letter, here's what I'm trying to do, here's what I'm for. And what's fascinating is I went to knock doors in May of this year, and people would answer the doors that said, I really appreciate your letters. I appreciate you telling me what you're working on because I can't read about it in the paper. And that's what the American people want. They want to feel like we're doing something to better their lives. We keep hearing about the economy is at the best it's ever been. Well, guess what? The people in my district are not feeling that. They're still feeling the stagnant wages. They are not feeling the opportunity to good-paying jobs, right? That is what they want us to work on. And they want us to work on, as Bobby mentioned, access to health care. Because in my district, you get one medical bill you can't pay, and you're behind. And that really could be the difference between you making it and not making it. And it shouldn't be that way in this country. We shouldn't have to pick. I remember reading the article about the woman in Boston whose leg got caught in the train, and she was screaming, don't call the ambulance. I can't afford the medical bill. Now, imagine for a moment, you're in that state, and you say no medical attention because you can't afford it, you don't have the insurance coverage, and you're worried about the bill. This is not the country we should be living in. These are not the circumstances that we should be living in, right? In a country like America, where we should be providing access to health care. And so I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful.
Well, healthcare will definitely be a top issue, without a doubt, in the next Congress. We're out of time. Please thank our two legislators for joining us this morning. I'll hand it over to Katie.